Good morning. I'm Morgan Lamandre with the Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response Center, or STAR for short. We're a sexual assault organization that has offices in Alexandria, Baton Rouge, and the New Orleans area. And one of the things that we've been working throughout probably the last 5 years or so is sort of bringing some best practices through our policies in Louisiana. And we've actually been sort of, I would say, a leading state when it comes to this. We always hear about how bad Louisiana does on certain lists, but this is something that we've actually can be proud of, some of the policies we have in our state. But it has been a long process, and there's still quite a number of things that we're missing from sort of the best practices. And one of the things that was brought to Representative Moore is sort of the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights piece of legislation. A version of it was passed on the federal level, and of course you have to pass it on the state level in order to be able to receive certain types of funding. We have been able to secure certain aspects of the funding, but there's still gaps, I guess, that we need to fill in. But one of the things that was brought to Representative Moore, we had concerns about how it was written because it actually conflicted with a number of laws we already have that were probably better in a sense than what was proposed in this bill. So one of the things though was that our rights for victims are kind of scattered all throughout our statutes because we have anything dealing with health in revised statutes, Title 40, anything pertaining to criminal law and procedure in either Title 14 or Title 15. And so the reason we have that is because we want certain people to be able to very easily find what they need. So if I'm in a health profession, I can go to the revised statutes Title 40. If I'm, doing criminal law aspects, I can go to 14 or 15. But what we don't really have is a place for victims to go to be able to find very succinctly all of their rights. They are most of the time not lawyers, and even if you are a lawyer, it is kind of hard to navigate. And in fact, the people who did the research in this national organization that presented the bill to Representative Moore said, well, Louisiana doesn't have all of these rights that you clearly need under federal law in order to get the millions of dollars that we already get. It's like, no, we do have them. So if lawyers can't even find all of these rights, clearly for survivors, it's going to be difficult. So we're hoping that through the study resolution, we can come up with what we're still missing and then find a way to succinctly put them in one place so it's also easy for victims to find. Because as someone who practices, I will say that there's a number of rights that we have that most lawyers through the criminal justice system, whether it's an ADA, a defense attorney, and there are certain penalties where lawyers can be held in contempt for not abiding by certain statutes. For example, if you use a victim's full name, a sexual assault victim's full name rather than their initials, an attorney could be penalized, through contempt proceedings. Well, not everyone knows that. So just something to put together. Like I said, there's still some gaps. We are leaving possibly federal funding on the table, which, just as a reminder, Louisiana is only one of a few states that does not have general state dollars for sexual assault programs for victims. And when I say that, I don't mean crime victims reparation funds that goes to forensic medical exams or for, basically lost wages, things like that. I'm talking about 4 sexual assault centers who service the victims that are, affected by sexual assault. And most of us, we provide free counseling, advocacy, and legal services. And there's a number of research articles to suggest that if you, in fact, get these services, the likeliness that you will not be affected by PTSD, will not be affected, in the long term is tremendous. So I could probably go on forever, so I'll just leave it at that. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Monica Taylor from Louisiana Attorney General's Office. I am the staff person for the Sexual Assault Oversight Commission, which resides in our office. We have been tasked with getting a single sexual assault forensic kit for the state of Louisiana. Previously, we have sort of hodgepodge paid for those we call it kits. Some rape crisis centers buy them, some hospitals buy them, some sheriff's departments, some sexual assault nurse programs. And what's happening is some places are paying as much as $30 a kit, where if we ordered them for the whole entire state, one specific kit that everybody used, we could get that price down maybe even below $20, which would be a significant savings. So we have developed a single kit. We're currently looking for a home for an agency to take ownership over it and to be able to apply for the grant or try and do some funding through the legislature to pay for those kits. And we're really talking about $60,000 a year. It's not, in the big scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of money, but we're talking about $60,000 a year. The other thing that we have done is the legislature has, and we'll be coming to you guys with this, the legislature has demanded that LDH does a protocols, and they had been doing it 9 regional protocols, but we weren't really getting buy-in from all of the players in all of the regions. Some of the regions were doing better than others. So what we've done is we've merged that into one statewide protocol with a couple of different options on how you want that to work. And so we'll be adopting that and bringing that to the legislature to get you guys to adopt it, so that we can just do the one protocol instead of the 9. And then that way everybody in the state is on the same page. There were a couple of things in the bill that I know in some other states, they didn't feel like those things needed a fiscal note, but here it will, because, there's some things for LCLE to do, Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement. If they're going to do that, they're going to need a fiscal note for staff to be able to do that. If the Louisiana Sexual Assault Commission, Oversight Commission takes on any additional tasks, we are not, there were no physical note on it, so my time is just paid for out of the general fund for the Attorney General's office. So there would need to be something there for that. And then there's some talk in here about a sexual assault kit tracking system, and this is something that has been in talks for a while. The Women's Caucus has issued a couple of different studies on this to do that. And what this would do is this would tell us where every single sexual assault kit is at any given time. And a lot of other states have gone to that. It's a significant amount of money. There are several federal grants that last for 3 years that would pay for the startup, but you have to continue funding it afterwards to sustain it. It's a way to allow victims a little bit of control and to move into being survivors. It's also a way to see, from my standpoint in the Attorney General's office, we do not have oversight over other agencies. Like we can't tell a police department what to do. We can't tell a DA's office what to do. That's not what we do. But what we can do is we can educate. So if we see that a certain department is having trouble getting their kits on time and everything, maybe they need some education. And so we can go out and we can talk to them and educate their officers on why this is important and the best procedures to handle it. We want to be able to do that as much as we possibly can. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I think I covered everything Representative Moore wanted me to cover. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lamandre and Ms. Taylor. I'm interested in the single kit piece. You said $60,000 a year. Is that just for the kits, or would that stand up the office? That's the staff person, or is that just the
No,
kit?
that's just the kits.
And
just
how many kits will $60,000 get?
The last numbers I think that we looked at were 30,000. Not 30,000, 3,000.
Yeah, and just there is like a separate kit for juvenile victims.
Yes.
And so I'm pretty sure that number would cover both types of kits. I want to say the adult kits we had estimated 1,500. So if you're saying 3,000, there typically are more. There's a need for more juvenile kits usually than adults.
And we do have a single juvenile kit in Louisiana, that was something that just sort of happened naturally. The Audrey Hepburn Center for Juveniles Sexual Abuse out of New Orleans developed a kit, and sort of everybody else in the state was like, oh, we love this, we're going to adopt this. And so that just happened naturally.
So
yes.
does the legislature have to take action to solve this problem of everyone trying to get individual kits? Or are you guys having those conversations now, or are we just operating in our own silos?
So right now, most people are operating in their own silos. The legislature will need to take action because, so it's kind of a complicated situation in the sense that there's no natural, like an agency has to take ownership of it, right? LCLE said that if we had an agency that could apply for a grant, we could probably use some VOCA funds, I think, or they had some money that would probably pay for the kits. But somebody has to apply for that grant. And there's no one, like the way our sexual assault system is set up in Louisiana, the coroner's office is actually the person who is in charge of it. And I see your eyes squinting, and I had the same reaction when I first read that. But here's this was the explanation that was given to me, and I think it makes sense. They are the only place where the medical field and the criminal justice field cross. So they are in the chain of evidence. And so that's why they are in control of them. And so you look at some other states, say Ohio, the Attorney General's office pays for them. Well, the Attorney General's office in Ohio runs the state crime lab. So it makes sense for them to pay for them and for them to be there. In, I think, New Jersey, the state police pays for them. That makes sense because they do all sexual assaults for the state. They handle those. Well, in Louisiana, we have 7 crime labs. So the state police crime lab, while they do the majority of the testing in the state on sexual assault kits, there are other crime labs in the state that do that as well.
And
Where are the other 6? So state police,
State police,
LSU.
No, state police, Southwest Louisiana Crime Lab, Acadiana Crime Lab, Jefferson Parish, St. Tammany Parish, North Louisiana Crime Lab. Maybe it's 6. Rebecca, who do I leave out?
Answer. There's also another component to this too, in that because of federal law and also state law now, adult victims have the right to receive a forensic medical exam at no cost to them, and they are not required to report to police right away. So the other component of that is if you have a case that it starts out as an unreported case at first, there's, if it is a reported case, usually law enforcement will take the kit afterwards. When it's an unreported kit, you also have another gap. And let's face it, and she works for a state agency, I don't. So I'll say this. Louisiana is what we do locally is like, this is how it's always been. We don't want to change. And unfortunately, that doesn't work for victims, because you also have these times where if you have a college student at LSU that gets sexually assaulted, but they're from another area, well, a lot of times they may go home to another area, but guess what? The jurisdiction that would be prosecuting or dealing with the case would be the jurisdiction where the assault happened. So then it just gets way complicated, payment issues, like it's all over the place. So we really do need a more uniform statewide policy for the kits, whether they're reported or not, for the process, for the testing, for everything.
And in some cases, we, in the majority of the state, but not all of the state, we have sexual assault nurse examiners who are trained nurses who have specifically trained, either we call them SANE A or SANE P, and they are either able to do an adult exam or a peds exam. Some we have a few in the state who are both A and P, but in some parts of the state we don't have one. So if you have someone who wants to have a medical exam, a forensic exam done, but they don't want to report to the police, then the hospital then has the kit and they have no place to send it.
Who pays for that? Does the victim have to?
They're
pay?
not supposed to, but the other issue too is that we're still working. There's certain, areas of the state that because it's just there are more areas of the state where the participation in the region is more prevalent, I guess you could say. So there are certain areas that unfortunately the victims do receive a bill by law. They're not supposed to. The medical
By
providers,
state or federal law?
both.
Okay.
So we had to make a state law. We were out of compliance for a number of years. We were supposed to be in compliance in 2009. We weren't in compliance until 2014, which risked a lot of federal dollars, but we finally have a system in place. So medical providers are supposed to directly bill the crime victims reparations for that kit. For the most part, LCLE has and the Hospital Association and LDH has put out literature about that, but sometimes there's turnover in emergency rooms, not everyone knows. But when you have the nurses really are the ones, that's what they do. So they're kept up to date on everything that involves sexual assault, whether through their medical profession as well as state law. So they don't typically, when we have the nurses, victims have a better experience overall, I find.
Okay.
And we have a very good example of how a sexual assault nurse program works here in Baton Rouge in Region 2. And we do have the director of that program and one of the nurses
Is she here?
They're
Okay.
here, yes.
Okay.
And we also have someone from the State Police Crime Lab here as
Okay.
well. So if you have questions for them.
Yeah, I know. I have her card. Representative Bacala for a question.
Thank you. I was going to mention, since the State Police Crime Lab is here, at least in this region, I believe the State Police Crime Lab provides the sexual assault kits to most of the law enforcement agencies. Is that still correct?
No, it's going to be the coroner's office is the one who they are basically who holds our region together, and they purchase the kits. And if any victims come within our region, it's they take a kit. They're traveling saints. They take the kit to the hospital with them.
Yeah.
It is not, from
Do
my
you know
understanding.
do you know if that's the case everywhere? Because I think where I came from, they were supplied either by state police or the crime lab, and so you kept a stock.
Yeah. So in Baton Rouge, EBR parish, the coroner, Bo Clark. Sorry, I couldn't remember. Dr. Clark, they do all of hospital region 2 through LDH, and that hospital region, he has an MOU with all the other coroners and the sheriff's departments and the police departments, and they purchase the kits. I'm sorry, Representative Bacala, where are you?
Ascension, right?
Ascension. Okay, so they cover Ascension as well, but in some other parts, I don't know that the State Police Crime Lab, but we could ask them. But I do know that
If they're here, maybe
Yeah.
Someone's here.
it's not that important.
North Louisiana Crime Lab does provide the kits up
Okay,
there. Yes.
and the other thing I was going to suggest, because you've covered so many topics that we could be here forever, is that perhaps you should supply this committee with maybe a list of deficiencies as you see it, so that we can have it's kind of hard to comprehend in testimony all the things you're trying to say, because you're covering so many topics. So that might be helpful to us if you provided some written document that says we feel like we're deficient in area X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
And if I could also just say, one of the things about the Sexual Assault Commission is that we were initially charged with developing this statewide kit, but we also weren't charged with providing a report to anyone or any other duty. So at this point, it's becoming this commission that's sort of not really getting, the information out. So I think that could also solve some things if the legislation dealing with what the commission does and provides recommendations and yearly reports, because we don't have that.
Well, if you want to wait till next session to provide that information, but I certainly wouldn't mind seeing it sooner.
Oh, no, we can get it to
Absolutely.
you sooner. I'm just saying too that, she's doing the study resolution, but we also have a system set up to where we could every year. I mean, there's always going to be more issues. We know that, later down the road, but to change something to where we can actually provide you with the deficiencies yearly,
And our office is happy to take that on. Of course, there would need to be probably a fiscal note with it.
Y'all have enough money over there. The AG has enough money.
How did I know you were going to say that, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chair, that's all the questions.
No, but we recognize that, in order to take it on, we're going to ask you guys to take it on. We could move some money around. Representative Fondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies, thank you for being here. I think Representative Bacala really touched on that you give a lot of testimony, and we know that you need a lot of things. I would encourage you to reach out to Captain Bobby O'Brien with the Houma Police Department and the Lafourche Parish Coroner, Dr. King. We kind of done some work on 40-1216.1. But one of the concerns we have, and I think you spoke about, is the ability to have access to a sane nurse. Mm-hmm. Then once we get a sane nurse, some of the problems we have is the sane nurse is not necessarily trained on what to do when that nurse collects the evidence. We've got situations where we have a victim who does not want to report to a law enforcement professional. So we identify her as a Jane Doe or by code number, and then the same nurse is riding around with potentially would be criminal prosecutorial evidence for weeks at a time, not knowing where to turn that evidence in at. I know that same statute says that we should have a regional plan, but I think you spoke about having a state plan, and that certainly should be more appropriate so we're uniform across the board, whether we creating the sexual assault kits the same way, how we picking up those kits, who's picking them up. But I think in the end, more importantly, is how do we get the advocacy to the victim? Right. So I appreciate what you're doing. I think you got a lot of ground to cover. I would not have known that to having these conversations with Captain O'Brien and Dr. King. But again, Representative Moore, thank you. Certainly a long way to go, but working with sane nurses and trying to get those sane nurses in each district, each region, and close to the victim. We don't want a victim who shows up as a sexual assault and waiting 4 hours in a hospital to have the sexual assault kit performed. So,
Representative Fondo, what is a sane nurse? I was going to act like I knew, but
it's a sexual assault nurse examiner.
Gotcha.
And try telling a victim, the sane nurse is about to come, because we've had quite a number of victims like, I'm glad I'm not going to get the insane nurse.
Well, I will say, Representative Fondo, I will say, I know that your area is working hard. I think they're working with St. Tammany Coroner's Office to get a program established there. I have had several conversations. I got a phone call probably about 1.5 years, 2 years ago from a woman who is on one of the parish councils down in your area who happens to be an ER nurse. And she was in tears because she had just spent 6 hours doing a sexual assault kit because she didn't know what she was doing. She had to read every little thing, and it took 6 hours. And she said it just broke her heart that she had to put the victim through that again. And then the one other thing that I know we've touched on a lot, but there's one other thing I do want to say is that, I'm not trying to bash anybody else or go after or say they have and we don't, but domestic violence, the state actually gives money for domestic violence. So the state coalition gets funding that they are able to pass down for education and outreach and advocacy to local centers. The Louisiana Foundation for Sexual Assault does not get state funding.
Yeah, and I think the big thing too is educating people on the difference between domestic violence and sexual assault, because a lot of people think it's the same thing, and it's obviously sexual assault can occur within an intimate partner relationship, but sexual assault, we cover anyone regardless of the relationship with the victim. So, yeah.
Okay. And about how much federal funding are we leaving on the table?
It depends each year. I know the other thing too is that I feel like there's not anyone who's monitoring the laws except maybe kind of me, which is weird because I'm not a state, agency.
We
person.
appreciate your work though.
Well, and so one of the things, each year I've been like, hey, we need this law. And thankfully people listen to me and get the laws passed. But each year there's different funding. I know that there was, I think it was almost an extra $1 million victim services providers were able to get for 3 years for when we passed the parental right termination bill. It was the Rape Survivor Child Custody Act. So if you become pregnant as a result of rape, we didn't have a statute that said, okay, well, the victim can terminate the parental rights of the rapist. Well, we got that passed and we were able to get an additional funding for victim service providers. And it's always little nuances like that. But that's another thing. we don't really have like a set sexual assault place where we're monitoring these laws, except randomly me, because we need money all the time. So, but that's, yeah, I think it depends. There also is the discretionary grant. So like she was talking about with the kit stuff, if we were to able to pilot something, and a lot of times Louisiana has innovations in sexual assault policies, but most of the grants, you have to be like a state government agency to apply for it. So as a nonprofit, I can't be like, no, you must apply for this. And also that still takes people's time to apply for those grants. So there's a lot of money we're potentially leaving on the table.
Okay. And this is something that, and we do have other folks that want to testify, but is this something that the Attorney General would like to take on if we were able to identify some resources?
So I think it is the opinion of our office that there's not a natural fit for our office to take on the kits and the tracking system, because we don't ever control any evidence whatsoever throughout the whole state. And so we've looked at a couple of other options. Rebecca from the State Police Crime Lab is probably going to kill me, but maybe the state police would be, because they ultimately have to enter it in CODIS. And I know that, it's a funding issue for them as well. I don't have my numbers with me on the tracking system, but it's not cheap. But there are some grants. And of course, I've told the state police if they were willing to take it, that our office, or, myself and Morgan, we would be more than happy to help them with the grant writing and work with LCLE, to get some, because that's where the money would ultimately probably come through. So we would be more than happy to work with them to help them, get through that process as well.
And last question, you mentioned the coroner's MOU. Does Bo have an MOU with all coroners or just in our region?
In our region.
In our region.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's all, I think Trevor and Mindy could probably tell you the specifics, but that's the other thing too, is that some people are kind of like, well, if you don't have a hospital in your area, obviously like people are going to go to another parish to get treated.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of this weird thing where parts of the parish, like East Baton Rouge, we get funding for the coroner's office, but they also try to get reimbursements for elements of the kit. So because we're kind of supplementing the fact that if you're in a parish that doesn't have a hospital, well, the coroner ends up not really having to incur those expenses just because they don't have a hospital. And that's also not like really a fair system, if you ask me, because then certain areas are taking on a lot of cost.
Okay.
So I know, for instance, in St. Tammany Parish, the coroner there runs the SANE program for that area as well, that hospital region, and he incurs the cost for all of the parishes. So none of the other coroners give him money for that.
Okay. Representative Marcel.
Thank you. I kind of forgot half of my questions. First of all, let me thank you for your work on this commission, and thank Representative Moore for her work. I guess my question is around what is your ask for this committee to have a statewide protocol versus the 9, I think you said that we had? Is that part of it? And I'm kind of like Bacala. I hate to agree with Bacala, but it's a lot of information that you've pouring out to us today. And so kind of what is your ask for this committee? One, and I'm assuming that if you're going to need money, I'll see you in appropriations at some point, right?
Yeah.
What is your ask? And the commission was established without having to being charged to provide a report.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Go.
So I'll say this, Representative Marcel, because I have talked with Rep. Moore, and this first hearing was supposed to really highlight the issue for us to really understand the complexity of the issue. And the follow-up meetings, from my understanding with Rep. Moore and the ladies, they will be submitting like different pieces of information. So we will in later meetings address the protocol issue, the kit issue, and all these different things. But this meeting today was it was supposed to be the aha moment for us to realize how complex the program is.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because
And it is aha. It's complex.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is because when we established the Sexual Assault Oversight Commission, I will say the commission legislative language was done. Kelly did a great job. Ms. Fultman did a great job with it. But it was the way that it came forward and happened is Representative Moreno, she was here and then she left during session, and so Senator Morrell picked it up, and so it was done sort of quickly, and I think we just left out that a report needed to happen, and so we probably need to fix that, definitely, but that's kind of what happened with that. But one of the reasons why it's such a complex issue is because it touches so many different aspects. Like, it's not just criminal justice. You know what I'm saying? So you have the medical side of it. You have the criminal justice side of it. You have the victim's rights and the victim reparations side of it. And so you have so many agencies. We have 17 different entities on the Sexual Assault Oversight Commission, and it's the Hospital Association, the DA's Association, the sheriffs, the chiefs of police,
And all agree.
it's an LDH, and it's all the different groups, and then you have people who represent the victims and the rape crisis centers, and so you're really talking about, it really cuts across a large section of people, and that's one of the reasons I think it's so huge and complicated.
And I have one final question.
Yes, ma'am.
I heard you guys say that we usually use more kids for juveniles. Is that correct?
Yes, just I would say like the sheer number of children that are sexually abused. I mean, and those are usually the acute cases that are getting kits. That doesn't even count the children that go in for chronic abuse cases where they're examined.
So, and I know you said it was self-reporting a lot of times, but I would imagine that would not fall in that category.
Correct, because of mandatory reporting laws.
It would
yes.
have to be mandatory reported,
Yes,
correct?
and that is, yes. It's
Yes.
adults in Louisiana. And it's also adults that don't have some sort of underlying other type of mandatory report. So if you have vulnerable adults, elderly,
right.
if there's some sort of level of burns on a victim, or, obviously there's other types of mandatory reports.
And you talked about the federal funding, but there's no specific pot of money that you're relating to. It's several different pots, and I'm sure there's a match that we would have to.
A number of the federal dollars that we get for victim services are pass-through grants, but obviously, it's still not the general dollars. There are some matches that are required for the VOCA funding. A lot of times we can get waivers, or they can be matched with volunteer hours if it's like a victim service agency volunteer hour. I don't believe there's a match for the VAWA fund, so STOP, which it's that pot of funding actually goes to prosecutors, law enforcement, as well as victim service agencies. There's a funding called SAS, Sexual Assault Service Provider funding. I don't believe there's a match. I'd have to double check for you.
Okay.
And then, so VAWA is Violence Against Women Act, in case, and that federal dollars, and they also, through that and through the Office of Justice Programs, they have short-term grants that agencies can apply for directly. So when I was talking about the sexual assault tracking system, there's a grant called SAFE ITR, which is to purchase the equipment and establish a tracking system. That's something that the federal government has put out. It's a 3-year grant that you get, and then the funding's done. But that is not matching.
Okay.
Something like that, where it's like a short-term thing to get something started or to address a specific issue, it's usually not a match.
Thank you very much.
Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Moore, for your work on this, and thank you, ladies. Question is, does the commission work along with the Family Justice Center and Child Advocacy Centers in regards to, I guess, if they, because I know they get federal funding, we use them in North Louisiana, about working in conjunction to help you get these things going?
So I think individually, all of the groups represented works with them. The commission does not. It specifically addresses adult. And so we don't have anyone on the commission, no member, like we don't have a representative from DCFS on the commission. We don't have someone from the advocacy centers. Most of our rape crisis centers do, not all of them, but just about all of them do juvenile as well. And so as an agency, our agency does work with them. As a nonprofit, they work with them. And so there's those relationships, but for the Oversight Commission, it was not put in our purview.
Okay.
There is a representative that happens to work at the New Orleans Family Justice Center on the commission, though. So,
Yes.
but I mean, there's different family justice centers throughout the state. So,
Right, and I just know in Northeast Louisiana, where we're from, most of sexual assault victims either end up at the Family Justice Center or at the Child Advocacy Center.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I didn't know how, in relation to your commission, how it worked and what was the pass through, and if y'all could. I know they apply for grants all the time, and I didn't know if y'all could work in conjunction.
Most of that goes through LCLE, Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement.
and I will say there are charges in state law for CACs, sexual assault centers, family justice centers, to where by law we're supposed to provide certain services, but we do not get funding from the state to do so. So we do have unfunded mandates as nonprofits. So.
Unfunded mandates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Jones. Thank you, ladies.